The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We welcome to today's show the Republican nominee for United States Congress in the 8th Congressional District, one Rob Bresnahan, who will take on six-term incumbent Democratic Congressman Matt Cartwright. Rob was born in Kingston and raised in Wyoming Borough and Hughestown. As a young boy, Rob grew up in the family business, Kuharchak Construction, which were electrical contractors, which was a union shop affiliated with IBEW. Rob would sweep the floors. He learned how to wire junction boxes and other duties. Rob has a strong work ethic, forged by getting up at 4 a.m. to plow snow for his neighbors, then off to school, followed by hockey practice, then off to help his mom at the family's bowling alley. Rob went on to earn his bachelor's degree from the University of Scranton, and while in school, at the age of 19, he became the chief financial officer of his grandfather's business, one Kuharchak Construction. Rob's a fifth-generation Northeastern Pennsylvanian, an accomplished businessman, college athlete, former chairman of the Joint Apprentice Training Committee, and trustee for the Health, Wellness, and Annuity for the IBEW 163 local union shop. Rob's also a community philanthropist and is completely dedicated to facing challenges and solving problems. It was that background and with those motivating factors that caused Rob to become a candidate for United States Congress, and we will discuss with him today the issues which caused him to run and the issues our country faces.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Rob, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Thanks for having me.
Well, for my audience's benefit, and they've already heard your credentials and your qualifications, which are excellent. But you actually did a Volpe Report. It's not your first time. It's your first time in studio, but you were at our Christmas party in New York, and that was the first introduction you had to the voters of this congressional district and the voters of Northeast and Central Pennsylvania. So we're glad to have you actually back. We had talked that night about in-studio stuff, and here you are. So welcome.
Thank you. And that was my first on-air interview, actually, as a candidate for Congress. So
Wow.
It was super exciting.
Wow. Well, you know, like they say, I heard this referenced a couple times in different contexts, but they refer to whether it's in basketball or football, your rookie year. You're a rookie. And but they also point out in many cases, near the end or part of the season, past midseason, at some point, that's really kind of not appropriate. You're not a rookie anymore.
We've certainly learned a lot.
Yeah.
And it's been a really exciting, humbling journey. And you know what? Listen, if you run for the right reasons, because you love your country, you love the people, and you love Northeastern Pennsylvania, you know, if you speak authentically from the heart and you tell the tale of what is true and what is false, it makes it incredibly easy. So it doesn't matter if you're in month number 9 or month number 1. If you speak from the heart and you're true to yourself, it is what it is.
Talk a little bit about your upbringing and the values that were instilled in you by your family, because right now in America, if this is probably 6 or 8 or 10 years ago, we all kind of had a general consensus on most of what I'll say are American values, and that's not true anymore. We have issues. There are strong moral issues. Fights about whether, for example, biological males should be competing with women in sports. And the radical Democrats, the Biden administration, Kamala Harris, has put together language in Title IX. They're going to allow males in women's locker rooms, biological males who are, saying they're women. So, that was an issue. Of course, critical race theory has raised its head, and Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd thing, and defund the police. And so there were those issues. And, so we're confronted. I'll have to quote a Democratic president right now, who's one of my heroes. And by the way, his nephew, Bobby Kennedy Jr., who's been on this show, said that his uncle, John F. Kennedy, and his father, Bobby Kennedy, would not recognize the Democratic Party today. And but he said, in one of his great speeches about the Civil Rights Act, that we are confronted primarily with the moral issue. I believe the issues at stake now they have moral implications for our country. So talk about your values and your family and your upbringing and where you stand in some of this stuff.
Well, I think what's important to understand is where I came from. I was born in Wyoming Borough, right on Butler Street, right across from the park off of 8th Street. And my grandparents had Koharchik Construction, a heavy highway electrical construction business that they started in their garage at their home. And my grandfather started with a station wagon and a ladder. He was an IBW electrician. And from an early age, I used to love going to work with him. I mean, I would scream and cry to be able to just go out onto the job site with him at 3 and 4 years old. And I remember once we were doing an addition on the porch of the house, and my grandfather sat there and made me wire the entire porch with him. And actually, we filmed an ad recently at the park right across the street from my house. And I remember I was telling the film production
Is that the one
crew,
you're on the lift?
No, this one's coming out now. Some of the hybrids that you'll be seeing over the next few weeks. But I always had work ethic installed to me at a young age. My grandfather brought me a quad. He'd tell me I had to go snowplow. He'd give me a loan, interest free, but I had to pay him back, and I had to work and pay things off. And I grew up in a really modest, middle class, normal upbringing. I mean, I had parents. I mean, my grandparents. My dad developed film. My mom would do bowling birthday parties over at Modern Lanes, and my entire life, that's how it was. I used to play street hockey. I mean, it was I was blessed with incredible educational opportunities, but I also learned a lot about life and how to be a person from my days on Butler Street in Wyoming. And my grandfather would take me to the warehouse. He would prop me up in the corner with a big pile of copper wire and be like, strip this wire, make sure you strip it away from yourself. And I'd come home covered in probably silica and dust, and my mom would be like, what did you do today? And that's just how I was always raised. I mean, there's some ads that we actually released. My mom filmed of me on some heavy equipment, on rollers, on skid steers, on bags. And I always say I speak bulldozer because that's how I was brought up. Always on the construction site, and I always planned on getting into the family business. My grandmother had told me that they would sell me the company after I got a 4-year college degree from University of Her Acceptance. But after 2008 happened, we got totally clobbered by the financial downturn. The surety companies, the banks, the bonding, all wanted to make sure, and we went from first generation to third generation. So they wanted there to be a clear-cut succession plan. And that's with some suggestions of our financial partners to say, hey, we have to put something in place here. And I went to the University of Scranton. I stepped in as chief financial officer. And, on the first day on the job, we were in some financially challenging places. I mean, we had payroll, we had lines of credit. I mean, and we had 50 employees that depended on our financial solvency in order to feed their families. So, at that point, since then, we've grown to about 400% from 50 employees to 165 employees. And I've always had the motto, to whom much is given, much is required. It was actually in the University of Scranton, right inside of the business school. And it's something that I always had taken to heart, which ultimately leads to why I'm sitting with you here and running for Congress, is because I want to make a difference. I want to make my community better. I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for the duration. And listen, my opponent, this isn't a personal tit for tat. I think Matt's a nice guy.
Compare and contrast is what you need to do on this show and in your ads, because if you just say he's a nice guy and then people say, well, why should I vote for you then? We'll just vote for him. So you need to do that. Go ahead.
And listen, I've supported him in the past, and I'll tell you the time I met with him. It was on April 22nd of 2 years ago. I sat in an office with Congressman Cartwright, and I asked for two things, nothing of which involved any kind of financial benefit to us. It was one, I own a building where Supreme Court Justice Taft, President Taft's coffin was allegedly made over in downtown Pittston, which we're currently renovating. And he told me that there's presidential archives. This would be no problem to figure out to see if there's any historical significance or correlations. And the second thing was, behind my buildings there are some alleyways. The water had some negative grade. It was flooding into our buildings. And I asked if there could be a way to help me facilitate conversations with the sanitary authority, the water company, the gas company, for me to pay out of pocket to fix this. And the next time he called me was 4 months later for a double max donation. And I had a problem with that. And I tell this story. And listen, my problem is when you vote with Joe Biden nearly 100% of the time, and you're with AOC 96% of the time, and Nancy Pelosi 97% of the time, you cannot come back to northeastern Pennsylvania and say, hey, I represent you. Because this is not San Francisco. This is northeastern Pennsylvania. And there is a vast difference between the ideologies and the values of each different location.
Well, you've done a wonderful segue into intertwining your background, which I think is important. If people get a feeling for your values, your work ethic, one of the issues always on in public campaigns is, and I believe makes incumbents sometimes vulnerable. Like, have you actually created a job? Have you met a payroll? Have you provided health care for employees? Have you done those things? Have you balanced the budget? Unlike the federal government, which just prints money and creates trillions and trillions in more deficits that our great-grandchildren, mine, are going to pay. Beside that, like, do you have any real-life experience? Do you learn to live in a family household or in a business setting as a CFO of a family company? I know personally about this. And again, there's no safety net there. If your expenditures exceed your revenues, you go bankrupt and you lay a whole bunch of people off. So, you come from back to a work ethic in a moral background of what's right and how to do things and what's not right. Those qualifications matter, and people heard that. Now, you've also provided, I believe, a nice segue into the next real important question is, so you've given some basic, but you've touched on some of the issues. So let's talk about the issues that you feel strongly about. Now, you mentioned that Congressman Cartwright votes almost all the time with Biden and Ocasio-Cortez and Pelosi, and this is not San Francisco, and you're right. So, like, some of the issues that you feel that should have been handled differently by him that matter to people in this district that you're supposed to represent.
Well, I think the ban on combustion engines is certainly pretty contradictory to ideological beliefs of northeastern Pennsylvania. I'm a big believer in, listen, we're an electrical contractor, and infrastructure is a huge part of my platform because you need to be able to distribute and transmit energy. Right. But being forced or told what kind of vehicle you're supposed to drive in northeastern Pennsylvania in sub-zero temperatures with the lack of reinvestment into infrastructure is a total miss and does not align with what we want in northeastern Pennsylvania. If you want an electric vehicle, drive the electric vehicle. No problem about that. But I don't want to be told that this is what I have to do. Just a few weeks ago, the SAVE Act, allowing illegal migrants to participate in United States elections. I find that fundamentally abhorrent on every different level.
Of course.
I mean, how is that even fair? And to pivot and run ads to suggest that you penned a letter to say that we have to be stronger on our border when you voted against funding it at least 6 separate times. Yeah. The Title IX, which we went into, that was another vote at the same time around the SAVE Act to not allow biological men participate in women's sports. Right. So, these are just fundamental, common sense, pragmatic issues. Right. And, there's the whole abortion conversation, which is currently being attacked on me, which is not what I said. Listen, here's the deal. You have to be empathetic. You have to be understanding. But I said multiple times that I would not support a national ban on abortion. And and Republicans try to, flamingo or stick their head in the sand on this. Right. I have no problem being forthright and standing and saying what I truly believe about it. I believe in your standard exceptions, rape, incest, life of the mothers. And I believe there's a pragmatic solution and there's a comprehensive solution in the middle that we can all agree on. No one is suggesting that we should have abortions at 9 months, but at the same time, we have to understand where certain women are coming from, and we need to be understanding to what they're going through.
Right. Agreed. Good answer. You've covered a lot there, and we'll take up one thing, and then we have to take a break. I've done several views on electric vehicles, but there's a lot of specifics. They don't work. They don't work. The batteries blow up. Their capacity that they claim, they run commercials, 280 miles, 300 miles of range, when in fact, if the temperatures, except for optimum range, they perform very poorly. The range is, in the wintertime, the range is half that. So there's those issues that, and then from a moral standpoint, I understand the moral argument about, supporting things to reduce climate change. I get that. But then you also have to talk about the blood, if you will. One of the number one ingredients for the battery, Rob, is lithium. It's mined in the Congo, and they're using children. They don't have our protection against children working labor laws in the United States. And they're dying in those mines. Those are some of the things. Some of the materials that go into the battery are dangerous to mine, plus the fact that they're digging up, when I say tens of millions of tons of the Earth's crust to get at the minerals. All disastrous for the environment. All of it. Bad, morally bad. The children are dying. So, those things don't get talked about.
You bring up a good point about lithium, and this is a great segue into energy. And the amount of lithium that is located in our produced fracking water is enough to offset over 45% of the United States lithium demand. And we sent over $13 billion to China to support the purchase of lithium. And we can do that right in our backyards. In energy, it's $75 billion of GDP is generated from our fracking industry, $40 billion of direct
labor. Which the Democrats want to shut down in this administration. And Kamala Harris I know she has lied and said, oh, no, I don't want to ban fracking. Well, we can pull up 27 different televised video interviews when she said, I'm against fracking and I support a total ban on it.
And 500,000 jobs. And you know who one of the first members of Congress was to endorse Kamala Harris for president? Was Congressman Cartwright.
Yeah. Well, obviously now the people know that's a strong issue. So at any rate, we're going to take a break. Again, I'm here with the candidate for United States Congress. It's the 8th Congressional District, right?
Number 8.
Yes. Yeah. Rob Bresnahan, who is a young man running for Congress, running for public office for the first time. And we're going to hear his views and compare and contrast on why you should vote for him and not for Matt Cartwright and the issues at stake for our country. We'll be back right after this message.
Now there's more places you can see the Volpe Report. Watch every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. on Fox 56. Or watch on YouTube at the Volpe Report. More ways to watch. Still the same premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians.
Welcome back, Rob. Here we go again. Now, we've covered a lot of ground, and we gave some great answers. Let's talk about a couple elephants in the room. Let's start with the first one, the biggest one. A long time ago, one of the top political gurus, ironically of the Democratic Party, James Carville, had said back in the 92 election, it's the economy, stupid. And, people, in my experience, now that I'm an old guy, people, they pay attention to issues that don't affect them directly in times of peace and prosperity, basically. Things are good. They can pay their mortgage, they pay their car, pay for their kids' school, they can afford their groceries, they can pay their heat bill. So everything's kind of cool. And thankfully, we all go through those periods where we have those times. And then you focus on things like we talked about, the abortion issue and some of the other issues. You have a chance to focus on those, what I'll call secondary issues. But when people are hurting, when they can't afford their groceries, they can't afford to pay their heat bill in the winter, and they're forced with heat or eat. You have families with children turning down the thermostat to lessen their energy bill cost so they can afford more groceries at the store. Groceries are up 22%. Gasoline that they put in their car has been up as much as 50%. So you can't afford gas, you can't afford your heat bill, you can't afford energy, you can't afford groceries. So right now, a lot of folks don't have the luxury of, well, I wonder what's going on with the latest in the war with Russia and Ukraine. They don't have the ability to get in some of these broader abortion issues and the other things. And I think that's going to be a fundamental issue in that campaign. So here's another statistic for you. Over 3 in 5 Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And almost 70% of Americans could not afford a $1,000 emergency at the end of the month. So take it.
We need to make life affordable again for northeastern Pennsylvania families, first and foremost. And I agree with, it comes down to the economy, stupid. And every time you turn on any kind of national media, we're being gaslit into being told everything is all hunky-dory, everything is fine. But when I talk to people out knocking on doors, it's the first or second thing that people bring to my attention. Sometimes it's the border, and most oftentimes
we're going to get to that's the other elephant in the room. Yeah.
Okay. But it's about, our senior citizens and trying to pay for prescription medication. And, they do turn on the news, or if they do read the newspaper, they're seeing hundreds of billions of dollars being sent to every other place on the planet, and they're struggling to make ends meet. This is the second consecutive year in a row that credit card debt is over $1 trillion. So how do you think we've arrived at that? It's because people are swiping a credit card, not making enough to pay off the bill itself, and it's for the bare necessities. That's the hierarchy of needs. It's for the kitchen table issues.
Let me add something to this. And you're on a roll, but but I think it's significant about that. Yes, people have been forced to put on credit basic necessity issues, whether it's a gas, mortgage payment, food bills. They're literally doing
Health
that.
insurance.
Health insurance. But here's why I interrupted you. I just got a bill on one of our credit cards. I can't remember if it was Sears or JCPenney. It was a notification. It wasn't actually a bill. It was a notification. Now we already know it's almost usury. It's the charges on credit card interest is 20%, 21%, ridiculous.
On a good day.
On a good day. Sears credit card, they were informing me, they were raising the credit card rate 34.75%. Now, people, what's going to happen to
How do you
all
dig
those
out of that?
Well, what happens to all those Americans, including Democratic Americans and Pennsylvanians, that have been putting all this money on credit, and they get that notice? Now their credit card bill just doubled or tripled, and they already can't afford to pay their mortgage. So I had to interrupt you. That's what the rates are going on the credit cards you just made reference to. Go ahead.
That's devastating. And think about, my generation and the idea of the American dream of being able to afford a home. I mean, that is totally out of the window. And you're talking about the utilities increase, the fuel increase, the grocery increase. Nobody got a 20% raise to even dent into what the current cost of living is. I mean, you need an economy that works. And right now, we do not have an economy that works. Look at interest rates on just homes. Now, I believe anytime in the near future, we're looking at a possible cut. But I mean, in order to have a thriving society, you need to be in those 5.5% to 6.5% ranges. It's not sustainable. It's not affordable. And my generation, I mean, you're deciding between, I like that analogy you used there. It was heat or feed?
Heat or eat.
Heat or eat. I mean, that's what many of our senior citizens and families, working families with multiple kids, talk about childcare and daycare services and education and just the necessities to exist. I mean, that's a big motivating. I'm a fiscal conservative. Yeah. First and foremost, I hate waste, fraud,
You're
and abuse.
a business owner, and you have to balance a budget and meet payroll like me. So you're almost required to be a fiscal conservative.
And that was a big part of my job when I came in as chief financial officer. We would sell 3 trucks to be able to afford 1, and that's how we had to rebuild the company. I mean, not essentially from the ground up, but we really had to retool how we were doing things. I'm a real estate developer in downtown Pittston. We took over some buildings. It was a condemned, unfit for human occupancy building. Nobody, whether if it's a mortgage or if it's a developer, which ultimately it's going to trickle down to the end user, whether it's a tenant or the end buyer of a specific product. I mean, companies need to be able to stay afloat. So, you see a lot of ads about, corporate price gouging. How do you offset a 300% increase on copper wire over a 4-year span? You don't. And that's ultimately like the end user is the consumer. That's us, the American citizen. But what's really infuriating is when you're spending $860 billion a year on debt service, with national debt now at $35 trillion, which is more than the defense budget.
Right.
Where are we in a situation to now be offering, $25,000 per every new homeowner, whether you're illegal or illegal? And then you want to talk about, taxing unrealized gains. Well, what if there's an unrealized loss? Am I going to get a check back from the federal government?
Of course not.
No, of course not.
Yeah, it's just the movement of the National Democratic Party into socialist Marxism. It's just, that's what it is. And what we didn't talk about, and bears mention, is how did we get into this fix of inflation disaster with what's going on? I've done views on this show, Rob, where I've talked about one of the top Democratic economists in the country, Harvard professor Larry Summers. He was the Treasury Secretary for Democratic President Barack Obama. When Biden came out in his second year with almost $2 trillion of stimulus because of COVID, Larry Summers, I did the quote on this show. We put up the board of his quote. He advised strongly against that infusion of money. He said the direct result will be record backbreaking inflation. And he said secondarily, what's going to happen then, it's basic economics. The Fed is going to raise interest rates, which will kick us into a recession. Well, welcome to 2024. So I think it's appropriate to talk about, we identified the significant problem with inflation and what's hurting people without talking about who caused the inflation. So,
Well, I think you have to look. It doesn't matter. We have to look at how to solve it. We got to stop the bleeding.
Right.
You got to get the tourniquet, and it comes down to fiscal policy. And you can't keep spending money that we don't have. Yeah. And I think people say, "What bills are you going to introduce?" It's like, well, I don't think that's the solution. More legislation, I don't think is exactly the answer. It's getting a rein on the bureaucracies, and it's stop hemorrhaging cash that we clearly don't have, and start paying down the national debt, because that terrifies people. The average American is over $100,000 in debt based off of the $35 trillion level. Right. And there's so many different ways in this country that the United States can make money. Right. And infrastructure is an incredible way to reinvest. And it's not just your roads and bridges. We were talking about traffic cones and construction season in northeastern Pennsylvania before we started. But earlier we talked about power distribution systems. Well, the majority of them were built in the 1950s with a 50-year usable life period. If you use your fingers and toes, and we want to make this big push towards electrification of vehicles, we really need to reinvest into our critical infrastructure needs. Right. Broadband communication, water, levies. $1 trillion in property are protected by levies. These are family-sustaining careers that could pay for health insurance, can put away for a 401k or a retirement option. But at the end of the day, let's invest in America. Let's focus on the United States of America. And hey, listen, the golden goose is sick here. Let's take care of this country first before. And listen, we have to have a strong foreign presence. I'm not saying just become an isolationist and leave everybody out to dry. But we need to put a special emphasis on taking care of our own people. Right.
Well, we have a few minutes left, and we have to. The other elephant in the room is our failed border policy and migration. When you mention how we have to take care of Americans, well, that's one way we can also help take. If you don't have borders, you don't have a country. But go ahead.
I'm glad you brought that up. A few weeks ago, we went to the border, and we saw it firsthand. So I don't know if I've gone to the border now as many times as the borders are, or if I've officially surpassed her on actual border
Well, if you went more than once, you passed our borders are.
So we went down to Yuma, Arizona, and we saw firsthand. And it was with Dave McCormick in the back of a van at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we saw 50 migrants walk right around the wall. And here, you have to think about, we saw women, children, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. And it's a humanitarian crisis well beyond just the actual illegal migrant problem. But you feel for the families, the mothers, and the people in Yuma, Arizona. Yuma, Arizona is a population of 95,000 people. They've had 600,000 border crossings since 2020, and the next day we went to a processing center. We saw how people are vaccinated. We saw the drain on the hospital systems, and a lot of NGOs. Basically, the city of Yuma it's for them to survive. They have to export people out. So Derek and I went back to the airport in Phoenix, Arizona, and the same person we saw at the processing center got on the airplane in the zone in front of us that we saw come around the wall and fly back to Newark. Wow. And what makes me totally irate is when you see our veterans who served for this country being put second to illegal migrants.
They're in homeless encampments at the same time that National Democrats, Nancy Pelosi specifically, has said, she's referenced the California law, a bill that's been signed into law, that they are going to provide housing for illegal immigrants, free housing.
But what about our people? What about our veterans? What about our senior citizens?
You got
pay the taxes.
Of course. So those are when I get back to see, those are moral issues for me. And where we started this show earlier on, where, at some point we're faced with a moral crisis, a moral dilemma that has to be addressed. And you've done a wonderful job, I think, of presenting your views and your vision. And we've hit a couple of, in fact, I think most of the major topics. Regrettably, we're out of time. But I wish you well in your campaign, Rob. You're a fine young man, successful, and the type of leader America can use. So good luck in your campaign.
Thank you.
Again, we're here with a Republican nominee for United States Congress in the 8th District, Rob Bresnahan, who's been running a hard campaign all the way back to my Christmas party when we introduced you 9 months ago. Well, you're around the far turn, as they call it in horse racing, and coming down the final stretch. So wish you luck in your campaign. We'll be back again next week with another guest dealing with the campaign and the future of Pennsylvania in this country.